Hey guys, I'm gonna make I have a long story, a couple of long videos about my story and how I got to where I am now, but I want to condense it because there's still people and maybe parts of videos you watch that my timeline doesn't make sense. So I'm gonna do this as quickly as I can. So I have a prior history of OCD and anxiety, but my parents never took me to a doctor. I never saw a psychiatrist. I was never, I think, well, I was formally diagnosed later, but before I ever took psych drugs, I had no formal diagnosis, but I definitely had these problems. I had tics and a lot of trouble when I was growing up. But it got to a point in 2004 when I was 22 where it hit a peak and I just couldn't understand what was wrong with me. I was experiencing DPDR, intrusive thoughts, panic attacks, like obsessions and depression and just horrible thoughts and just experiences, and I never understood what it was. And my mom ended up getting a book from a friend of hers because my mom was very concerned about me, and a friend suggested I might have an anxiety disorder. So she gave my mom this book and she gave it to me, and I read it and it changed my life. And through self-directed CBT, I made a full recovery, and after that I felt free. And I moved to another city, and which I never thought I would ever be able to do because I'd always had this anxiety OCD problem my whole life, even though I was functional. But to move to another city and be on my own was something I never imagined I could do, but I never knew why. And then once I understood anxiety and overcame it, then my life really opened up. So I moved away, and 7 years after that experience, so I was living a full life. I wasn't really affected with anxiety or obsessions at all anymore. Maybe had like a few blips here and there, but nothing that ever derailed me or changed my life significantly at all. And then in 2011, I had lost a job that I loved, and I was laid off, and I went into a depression naturally, but just clueless. It was different from my experience of anxiety and OCD that I had had growing up, and it lasted about a month, and it was affecting my ability to function, and I wasn't the person I normally am. So I wasn't my bubbly self. I wasn't exercising, which I had always enjoyed, wasn't taking care of my diabetes, and made the horrible life-altering mistake of going to a doctor. And I wish I would have done what I did in 2004 and just called my mom and say, hey, like, can you help me? Do you know what I can do to feel better? And I wish I would have done something similar, like CBT or some type of therapy, because it was situational. But I told my doctor, he put me on citalopram, 20 milligrams right off the shot, like no titrating up. And within like 2 weeks, I felt incredible. And I think my experience is different than some people's in that aspect, where I really loved antidepressants and I sang their praises for especially those first 6 months. Like, I really felt like not only did it lift my depression, but I felt this very high stress tolerance. I was way less, because I've always been empathic and someone who kind of wears their emotions on their sleeve, and it took away like any feel. I felt invincible, almost euphoric. And I took citalopram, sang its praises. I found a girl at work who was also taking citalopram, and we would literally like go out for drinks and talk about how amazing these pills are. And I took them for 7 years until 2018. The only negative side effects at the time of taking this drug over those 7 years that I noticed was weight gain and sexual side effects, which is two of the most common side effects from antidepressant drugs. But in hindsight, I think I was starting to experience poop out at about 4 years or 5 years into it, because I remember feeling anhedonia, but I had went through a death of a close friend and I thought it was just from that. But I was having all kinds of like, nocturnal panic attacks, and I was starting to get these somatic obsessions with blinking and breathing and weird things. And just, I'd have like a day where I was just severely anxious, and I couldn't figure out why, especially since my life was really good in every aspect. I had a great relationship, or what, so how I perceived it at the time was a great relationship, you know, a job that I loved, and I had great landlords, a great place to live, nice car, close friendships. I had everything really, and I couldn't understand why I was experiencing those symptoms, you know, and the S word thoughts, and I'm like, where is this coming from? I had not experienced those. And my drinking, like, I had gotten worse, a worse alcohol problem, and never tied any of it to the drugs, but I do feel like those were further effects of citalopram and poop out potentially. So in 2018, I had gotten myself into a horrible financial bind. I had racked up too much debt and decided that whatever I paid a month for the citalopram, like $5 a month, was too much. And I'm like, I don't think these drugs are doing anything anyway. I went to my doctor, who was different than the prescribing doctor from 7 years earlier, because I had moved to another city, and did a 4-week taper, not knowing anything, and immediately pretty much started experiencing effects. But I had never heard of withdrawal, nothing. Didn't tie it to coming off the drugs whatsoever. This was in April of 2018. And my life wasn't as good at that point. I didn't have the same, you know, great job and landlords, because like I said, I had moved cities, and my experience in the newer city was not the same as the previous one. And so I just kind of chalked it up to life stress and maybe just not being happy. But, you know, I experienced intrusive thoughts was one of the first things. Looping, horrible looping, just relentless looping intrusive thoughts, panic attacks, crying spells, fatigue, headaches mixed with insomnia. I just didn't feel right, but I had no idea why. And over the course of 6 months, you know, some of the things started to dissipate, especially physically, but mentally I was still looping just constantly. So at 5 months off, so in September of 2018, I called a mental health crisis line, and they referred me to a psychiatrist, of course. And the wait to see the psychiatrist was 2 months. So from September to November, I had to wait for the psychiatrist, and miraculously, I literally overnight just recovered. But I didn't know what I was recovering from. I didn't have any idea what had just happened to me. And so I went to that psychiatrist appointment anyway. And when I filled out the intake form, they told me to base it on how I had been feeling, because I must have expressed, I can't remember exactly now, because this was 6 years ago, I must have expressed that I was feeling better, but I remember them saying, base it on how you were feeling when you called the helpline and kind of how you had been experiencing life then. So of course, I came back as, you know, major depressive disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, and generalized anxiety disorder. That was my diagnosis from a psychiatrist. And she said, you should have never come off your meds. She prescribed me back on citalopram and added Seroquel. For some reason, I was like, I ain't taking no antipsychotic, as little as I knew about these drugs at that point. But I did go back on the citalopram, back to 20 milligrams, which is so stupid because I was feeling better. Why did I go back on? But I trusted her, and I thought, okay, I didn't understand that I had been going through withdrawal and that it resolved very quickly. So I went back on, and I had right away sweating through the sheets, bolting awake in the night with cortisol rushes, agitation, increased anxiety, DPDR. It was just terrible. But I had no idea. I knew that physically, and just like pounding heart, I knew physically something was wrong, but I didn't know what. And so I phoned the psychiatrist. I think I'd been taking the drug for like 3 days again, and she said, your dose is too high, cut it in half. So I went down to 10 milligrams of citalopram. Didn't resolve the symptoms, and so I think I stayed on it for a few more days, and then my boyfriend at the time was like, stop taking that poison. And so I did, and I continued to feel well again. Like after I stopped that reinstatement, I went back to like my baseline of feeling better. So I felt better from November. So that was November of 2018. I had been feeling better since September, and it lasted until April of 2019. And then it was Easter weekend. I had come back to my hometown to see family, and my symptoms just started coming back. I remember being at my uncle's house, and my mental intrusive looping just started again out of nowhere. And I'm like, what the hell? And I remember just literally bracing the chair and just thinking, no, no, no. because it had just about driven me crazy the first time. So my loop, and I'm like, maybe it's just a fluke, or maybe it's just a blip or whatever. Went to bed that night, woke up, the looping started. As soon as I opened my eyes, loop, 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 loop. I looped for 18 more months. So April 2019. And at the time, my life was not so good and so great, because I had expressed before that I had been, years prior, everything was really well, going really well in my life. I had a great relationship, blah, blah, blah. Everything I described earlier. At this point, I had just switched jobs again. My relationship was over, but I couldn't admit it to myself. We had just moved. So I had a lot of life stress, and I wasn't happy in my life. And I'm not saying that contributed to the symptoms coming back, but I just wanted to outline that I had a lot of stress going on, and maybe that triggered it. I don't know. At that point, I had discovered withdrawal, but I still wasn't very knowledgeable, but it had started to make more sense that the first time that's what I was experiencing. But my symptoms were different from people's, in that I couldn't find a lot of people that had this mental intrusive looping, just relentless. And then I was like, why did I feel better for 7 months? And then it came back. Like, I didn't know about windows and waves. I didn't understand it at all. Because when I had come off the drug in 2018, April, I never had windows and waves. I just felt horrific. I had some lifting of physical symptoms, like I said, but the mental was just relentless, and I never had a break. And then all of a sudden it just disappeared for 7 months. And then it came back with no provocation at all that I can recall or think of. And so I loop again from April of 2019 to October of 2020. In that time, I moved home. So I ended my relationship in the summer of 2019, and I moved home in September of 2019 to live with my mom at age 37. I had been working because it was mostly mental symptoms that were affecting me so much, but it didn't, I forced myself to go to work because my debt problem was still bad, which is what took me off psych drugs in the first place. So I had to work, and I wasn't physically suffering a lot. I was just mentally really bad, but I just faked it. But I was miserable and self-harming, and it was just because I just could not get it to stop, and just depressed as hell, because I'm like, how did this come back? Like, what is happening to my brain? I couldn't control my thoughts. So finally in October of 2020, after 18 months of looping again, I just couldn't take it anymore. And at that point, I did know quite a bit more about this whole withdrawal process. So I reinstate at like a 20th of my dose. I think I started at 1 milligram because I'd had that adverse reaction when I reinstated at 7 months off. But I was like, I'll start super low. But I was going up and down because I'm like, I actually felt bad immediately when I took it. And I was like, oh, but people around me were saying it's not a therapeutic dose, and the doctors, so I'm going up, I'm going down, I'm going up, because I was having adverse reactions, but they were still pretty small at that point, but nothing I'd experienced in my other reinstatement. So I started getting like really bad, like bomb feeling going off in my head, internal vibrations and burning, like stuff I had not experienced before. And so anyway, I reinstate. I'm going up and down in doses, which I know now is really bad. And then, I was doctor hopping. I was in and out of different clinics and seeing different doctors, and they all were saying you have severe OCD, you're not on the right drug. And then starts the like polydrugging. So I'm trying all these different things. I'm getting worse and worse and worse. The symptoms are snowballing. I'm developing akathisia. I'm developing electric bolts going through my body. I'm developing like just every side effect, but nobody's recognizing it. And I'm just like, I just got to push through. And I'm getting transcranial magnetic stimulation. And then it got so bad, the side effects, that I ended up on Ativan. And I was only going to take it for 4 days, but then it relieved so many of my symptoms that I'm like, okay, I'm going to keep going. Didn't know much about benzos yet because I had only been injured by antidepressants at this point. So I ended up taking Ativan for like 2 months, and all these other drugs intermixed in there. I took antipsychotics, more SSRIs, even gabapentin and zopiclone and whatever. And then I go, I end up on Ativan because it was the only thing that took my symptoms away. Then it went paradoxical after 3 weeks. I try to micro taper. I'm getting more and more paradoxical. So now we're in February of 2021. My muscle jerking, my body's flopping all over. I'm tremoring. Like, it's just getting so severe that my family can't take it anymore. They call 911. I end up in the hospital. I had intermittent hospital visits during this reinstatement. I had like passing out spells and super high heart rate and all these different things that nobody was recognizing. But then I finally, they're recognizing these adverse effects. They're putting me on propranolol, and this final stint in the hospital, February 2021, I'm given more propranolol than I had been taking. They pull me off the last 0.6 milligrams of Ativan. They try to give me other drugs still because they're like, you still have OCD, but this is drug effects all along. But I'm still not like convinced totally. And then finally, I basically blow up at them in the psych ward, and I'm like, I hate you people. I was normal before drugs. I'm this walking neurological disaster. I have full body movements. I've got vibrations, burning. My muscles would just like get stuck in position. The looping is even worse now. I'm hallucinating. It's just a nightmare. So I leave against medical advice. In February of 2021, they threatened to call the police on me because I had to follow up with the crisis team, and I didn't yet know what you should and should not say to a crisis team, and then they're threatening to pick me up, and it's like, it's just this horrible thing, and I just swear off psych drugs forever at that point. And I'm still on propranolol though, so I'm off all psych drugs in February of 2021, still on propranolol at that point, 90 milligrams a day, so 30 milligrams 3 times a day. I had found an amazing GP at the tail end of all this disaster who bumps me up in dose. He validates me. He puts me on disability. I'm just a disaster for 6 months after I come off the drugs, and I'm planning my exit. Like, I just can't cope with this. Like, I can't do this anymore. I had been suffering already for 3 years, and I basically felt back at square one. Now I have to recover from all these other drugs I took in the reinstatement, plus benzo withdrawal on top of my original citalopram injury. So I come off propranolol in April because it did help my physical symptoms once I got to a high enough dose. I come off in April, and I didn't have trouble coming off that drug, and I swear off everything. I struggle and struggle. It was just hell on earth. I formed this support group that I literally plug in 12 hours a day in acute. We're all in acute. Most of us are multiple drug damaged, akathisia, everything. And they're my lifeline for 6 months. And then at 6 months, so August of 2021, I start getting windows in the evening, just small ones. I'm not symptom free, 50% less in the evenings. So that gives me more hope. But mentally, I'm still severe. I hardly had known anyone that had the mental like I did. And so I did anything to escape. And my one escape was reuniting with an ex-boyfriend, hence, why I have a child now. I got pregnant, which was not really supposed to be a possibility for me because of my age, my pre-existing chronic health conditions. But I have this surprise pregnancy. The surge of hormones in my first trimester brings all the symptoms back. I'm pacing. It's just horrible. Electricity, just head to toe, everything. And I'm like, I can't survive this. Like, I have to terminate the pregnancy. But I didn't. My family, the ones who were supportive, surrounded me and was like, we're going to get you through this. The second trimester, I felt like the leveling out, but elevated hormones helped, and I started getting more full windows. Then I crashed again in the third trimester. I really crashed postpartum. And then about 6 months postpartum, I felt like I turned a corner, something switched in my brain. And for the first time in essentially 4.5 years, other than that 6 months where I kind of healed overnight in 2018, suddenly it was like my brain felt normal again. But then I was like, I still experienced sensitivities to meds. I was still vulnerable to setbacks, to stress, everything. But I turned a corner at that point. And then 2023 comes around and I'm feeling like better than I had in years. And that was when I started informally coaching and I started like building up my life again. And so that's the short-ish version. I think my other video is like an hour and a half long. Hopefully that makes more sense. Yeah, and it's just been a rebuild since then. My life is really great now though. I live a fully functioning life, but it was hell on earth for 4.5 years. I made a lot of mistakes along the way, I think, like a lot of, drinking in my first withdrawal. And it took me so long to put the pieces together because nobody helps you, as you know. Nobody tells you what's going on. Nobody explains this to you. I don't remember. I was looking up at that time symptoms, like my symptoms separate from withdrawal. I was looking up intrusive thoughts and panic attacks, and it took me so long to piece it together. So hopefully that is kind of cohesive and you understand without having to watch an hour and a half long video what happened. It was just the worst thing I've ever been through, and it still has effects to this day as far as like my spiritual life, medical trauma, but it gets better all the time. And I've met amazing people along in this journey, and I just still want to spread the message about these drugs and what people aren't giving informed consent or being given informed consent about. And that's why I have this platform. So anyway, hopefully that makes sense. If you have further questions, let me know in the comments, and I need to head home now. Bye.